On July 20th, 1969, Neil Armstrong stepped onto the moon. 500 million people watched. It was the proudest moment in American history. The rocket that put him there was designed by a man who had built rockets for Adolf Hitler, using slave labor from a concentration camp. The United States government knew this. They classified his records. They gave him citizenship. They made him a national hero. And when he died, the President of the United States issued a statement calling him one of the greatest men of our time. His name was Wernher von Braun, and his story is not the exception. It is the blueprint.
In the spring of 1945, the war in Europe was over in everything but name. Allied forces were closing in on Germany from every direction, and inside Washington, a different kind of panic was setting in. Not about the war, about what came after. Germany had produced scientific minds unlike anything the Allies had seen. Rocket technology, jet engines, chemical weapons, aviation research, advances that had pushed the war in directions no one had anticipated. The question was not whether to take that knowledge. The question was how fast. A secret United States intelligence program that, between 1945 and 1959, recruited more than 1,600 German scientists, engineers, and technicians and brought them to America to work for the government. The name came from the paperclips used to attach new, sanitized biographical files to the originals, because many of the originals contained things that would have made immigration impossible. Nazi party membership, SS records, connections to war crimes. All of it clipped away, filed separately, classified. The most important name in the program was Wernher von Braun. Born in 1912 to a Prussian aristocratic family, von Braun had been obsessed with space travel since childhood. He joined the Nazi Party in 1937. He became a junior SS officer in 1940. Not, he would later insist, out of ideology, but because it was the only way to keep building rockets. The V-2 was the world's first long-range ballistic missile. Developed at the Peenemünde research facility on the Baltic coast, it was von Braun's masterpiece. 60 feet tall, capable of striking targets over 200 miles away, traveling at 3 times the speed of sound. There was no defense against it. You could not hear it coming. Between 1944 and 1945, the Nazis fired more than 3,000 V-2s at London, Antwerp, and other Allied cities. An estimated 9,000 civilians and military personnel were killed in the attacks. But building the V-2 killed far more people than firing it. After Allied bombing raids forced production underground, the V-2 was manufactured at a facility called Mittelwerk, deep inside a mountain in central Germany. The labor force came from Dora, a nearby concentration camp. Prisoners worked in freezing tunnels, 12 to 14 hours a day, with almost no food, no sanitation, and no medical care. They were worked to death deliberately. When they could no longer stand, they were replaced. More than 20,000 people died building the V-2, more than died from being hit by it. Von Braun visited the Mittelwerk facility multiple times. He was there to inspect production, to communicate design changes, to ensure the rockets being built met his specifications. NASA's own records acknowledge that he was aware of the conditions and was involved in decisions about the use of slave labor. A former prisoner testified that von Braun went to Buchenwald to personally select workers for the program, that he walked the corridors, saw the exhaustion, saw the suffering, and said nothing. Von Braun would later say he had deep regret for the victims. He would also say, "A war is a war, and when my country is at war, my duty is to help win it." In May 1945, as Germany collapsed, von Braun made a decision. He gathered his core team secured as many technical documents as possible, and traveled south into the Austrian Alps. He surrendered, but not to whoever found him first. He waited for the Americans. Von Braun understood his value. He negotiated his own capture. Within weeks, he and an initial group of around 125 German rocket scientists were on their way to Fort Bliss, Texas. Not as prisoners, as assets. The Joint Intelligence Objectives Agency, the body overseeing Paperclip, was explicit in its instructions. The scientists' records were to be reviewed and revised before being forwarded for immigration processing. Von Braun's SS membership was noted as nominal. His visits to Mittelwerk were not mentioned. His role in selecting slave laborers from Buchenwald was classified. The State Department objected. The Department of Justice objected. The Army overruled them both. The argument was simple, and it was the same argument used for Unit 731. We needed them before the Soviets got them. Roughly half of all Paperclip recruits had been Nazi Party members. A minority had significant SS or SA records, not opportunistic membership, but documented involvement in the machinery of the Third Reich. One Paperclip recruit, Otto Ambros, was a convicted war criminal. He had been sentenced at Nuremberg for his role in the production of nerve agents and for his use of concentration camp labor at IG Farben. He was granted visa waivers to visit the United States on multiple occasions. At the same time Paperclip was bringing Nazi scientists into America, the country was turning away Holocaust survivors at its borders under immigration quotas that had not been adjusted for the war.
In America, Wernher von Braun reinvented himself. He learned English. He converted to evangelical Christianity. He wrote popular books about space travel. He appeared on television with Walt Disney to explain the dream of human spaceflight to millions of American families. He was on the cover of Time magazine. He was celebrated as a visionary, a patriot, a hero. And when anyone asked about his past, the Army's answer was ready. The files were classified. Von Braun's SS records, his visits to Mittelwerk, his role at Buchenwald, all of it classified.
On July 16, 1969, the Saturn V rocket lifted off from Kennedy Space Center. The rocket that carried Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins was the Saturn V. It was the most powerful machine ever built by human hands. Its chief architect was Wernher von Braun, director of NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center. 4 days later, Armstrong stepped onto the lunar surface. 500 million people watched. It was, by any measure, one of the greatest achievements in human history. 6 weeks before the launch, von Braun had received an uncomfortable letter. A West German court had asked him to testify in the trial of 3 former SS men from the Dora concentration camp, the camp that had supplied slave labor for the V-2. Von Braun, afraid the publicity would damage his reputation and NASA's, tried to avoid it. In the end, he gave a statement at the West German consulate in New Orleans. He denied personal involvement in any mistreatment. He assigned all responsibility to the SS. 2 weeks later, Apollo 11 launched. The timing was noted by no one in the American press. Von Braun received the NASA Distinguished Service Medal in 1969. He received the National Medal of Science in 1975. President Jimmy Carter issued a statement after his death in 1977, calling him a man of bold vision. His SS records remained classified for years after his death. The full picture of his role at Mittelwerk only became publicly available in the 1980s, when the files were finally declassified. Arthur Rudolph was the operations director of the Mittelwerk. He was responsible for the day-to-day running of the facility where prisoners were worked to death building V-2 rockets. He was brought to America under Paperclip. He worked at NASA under von Braun. He was awarded the NASA Distinguished Service Medal in 1969, the same year as his former director. In 1984, the Justice Department's Office of Special Investigations confronted Rudolph with evidence of his role at Mittelwerk. He was offered a choice: face prosecution or leave the United States. He left. He surrendered his American citizenship. He died in Germany in 1996. He was never tried for war crimes. Paperclip ultimately brought approximately 1,500 German and Austrian scientists and their families to the United States. The majority became American citizens. None of the scientists or engineers recruited through Paperclip were ever brought to trial for war crimes. At the same time the program was running, Jewish displaced persons, survivors of the camps where Paperclip recruits had sent their workers, were being turned away at American borders under immigration quotas that had not been adjusted for the war. The message the policy sent was not complicated. What you knew mattered less than what you could build.
Every time humanity goes back to the moon, the rocket technology that makes it possible traces a direct line back to Peenemünde, to the V-2, to the men of Dora who built it and died building it. That is not a reason to undo what was achieved. Apollo was real. The moon landing was real. The achievement belongs to every person who made it happen. But the men who designed the rockets were protected from accountability by the same government that celebrated the achievement. The files were classified. The records were sanitized. The story was managed. And by the time the truth became available, the heroes had already been made. History doesn't erase what was built on. It just decides how long to wait before anyone's allowed to look.